to this. This is what a death row inmate ordered for his last meal, so much so that now nobody in Texas is going to get a special last request meal.
There are crimes that horrify us, and then there are crimes that change the way an entire state sees justice itself. Tonight, we're diving into one of those stories. A story that begins on a quiet Texas road in 1998. Imagine ordering a feast fit for a king on your final night alive, and then refusing to take even a single bite. That's exactly what happened in one of Texas's most shocking death row stories. A case so disturbing that one man's last meal would go on to change prison policy forever. This isn't just about murder. It's about hatred, justice, revenge, and a final act that left everyone speechless. This is the story of Lawrence Brewer, his horrifying crime, his bizarre final request, and the single uneaten meal that shook the justice system, a small town and a horrific crime. It all began on a warm summer night in 1998. A small East Texas town, sleepy, humid, wrapped in the kind of silence you only get in the Deep South, a place that looked peaceful on the surface. But what happened that night would expose the ugliest side of humanity.
More evidence against dragging death suspect Bill King. First, William Hoover, who served time in prison with King, testified that King discussed abducting a black man and killing him to win membership in a racist gang.
A 49-year-old man named James Byrd Jr., a black resident known for his friendly smile and love for his community. He's dressed neatly as he always is, jeans, a white shirt, and a cap. He's cheerful, humble, and was walking home after a small family gathering. And little did he know that it was his last. A few streets away, a pickup truck slows down. Byrd was offered a ride by three white men, Sean Berry, John King, and Lawrence Russell Brewer. They'd been drinking, riding around aimlessly. But beneath the laughter and country music, there's something darker brewing. All three are white supremacists. Brewer and King had met in prison, where they became part of a racist gang called the Aryan Brotherhood. But instead of dropping Byrd home, they drove him to a deserted country road known as Huff Creek Road. The truck turns down a dirt road leading deep into the woods. The night air thickens. The sound of crickets fades under the growl of the engine. Then, the horror begins. What followed was one of the most brutal hate crimes in modern American history. The men beat Byrd mercilessly when he's unconscious, tied him by the ankles with a chain to their pickup truck, and dragged him for nearly 3 miles. 3 miles of unthinkable cruelty. The road becomes stained with blood. Byrd's body is torn apart until finally it hits a culvert, ending his life instantly. By the time they stopped, James Byrd Jr. was dead. His body left in pieces along the road. When the police find what's left of him the next morning, they can hardly comprehend what they're looking at. Even seasoned officers break down at the scene. One investigator later said, "It was like something out of a nightmare." The murder shocks Jasper. The entire nation was horrified. The media descends on the small Texas town. Reporters, cameras, vans, all turning the quiet streets into a circus of flashing lights. The case became a symbol of racial hatred and sparked debates on hate crime legislation. When the suspects are caught, Berry, King, and Brewer, the evidence is overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, tire tracks, even the chain itself. Soon the 3 men were arrested and charged with capital murder. During the trial, prosecutors describe every gruesome detail. Jurors weep. People in the gallery can't bear to look at the photos. James Byrd Jr.'s family sits through it all, dignified, grieving, but determined to see justice. Lawrence Brewer, the man who tied the chain around Byrd's ankles, shows no remorse. In court, he smirks. When asked if he feels sorry, he says coldly, "As far as James Byrd goes, no." That moment freezes the courtroom. Brewer and King, both known white supremacists, would eventually face the death penalty, and Berry receives life in prison. For the Byrd family, it's not victory, it's just closure. But for Brewer, his countdown begins. 13 long years on death row. For over a decade, Lawrence Brewer sat on death row in the Polunsky unit in Texas. Steel bars, concrete walls, fluorescent lights that never go dark. Inside Texas's Allen B. Polunsky unit, death row is a world of its own. Behind bars, Brewer remained unapologetic. Brewer spends most of his time in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a small cell. He reads, writes letters, occasionally watches TV. He showed no remorse for what he had done, even bragging about it in letters. Even after more than a decade behind bars, he insists he's not sorry. In interviews, he shows flashes of arrogance, sometimes mocking, sometimes detached. He claims he's found God, that he's ready to die, but those who see him in person say there's something almost gleeful about his calmness. Outside, debates about capital punishment rage on. Is it justice? Is it vengeance? But no matter how tough Brewer acted, time's ticking never stops. By September 2011, Brewer's execution date was set. And when you're counting down your final hours, there's one tradition every condemned prisoner in Texas looked forward to: the last meal. For decades, Texas death row inmates were allowed to request anything they wanted for their final meal, no matter how extravagant. It's supposed to be a small act of mercy, one final comfort before the end. But Brewer, the ruthless murderer, he turned it into something else entirely. On September 21, 2011, Lawrence Brewer submitted one of the most excessive last meal requests in history. The day before his execution, Brewer is given the standard question, "What do you want for your last meal?" He pauses, and then, almost mockingly, lists out a feast fit for a king. Listen to this. He asked for 2 chicken fried steaks covered in gravy and onions, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger loaded with every topping imaginable, a cheese omelet stuffed with beef, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and jalapenos, a full serving of fried okra with ketchup, a pound of barbecue with half a loaf of white bread, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, a pint of Bluebell vanilla ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, and to wash it all down, 3 root beers. It was a meal so massive that the kitchen staff had to work for hours to prepare it. When the tray was finally ready, it looked less like a last meal and more like a banquet. But here's where it gets strange. When the food was brought to him, Brewer didn't touch a single bite. He looked at the tray, pushed it away, and reportedly said, "I'm not hungry." The officers are stunned. Word spreads quickly through the prison. The man who committed one of the most horrific hate crimes in Texas history just mocked the final act of mercy he was given. Here comes the outrage. When word got out, it caused an uproar. People across Texas were furious, not just because of the meal itself, but because of the mockery it represented. This man had committed one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. He'd shown no remorse, and now, on the night of his execution, he'd ordered a feast, only to waste it. For many, it felt like one last act of defiance. Among those outraged was Texas State Senator John Whitmire, the chairman of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. When he heard about the untouched meal, he was livid. He immediately wrote a letter to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice saying, "Enough. This privilege is an insult to victims' families and taxpayers. End it immediately." And within 24 hours, they did. The very next day, the Texas prison system officially abolished special last meals for death row inmates. From that moment on, anyone scheduled for execution would receive the same food as every other prisoner in the facility. No special requests, no last-minute indulgences, just the standard meal of the day. In other words, Lawrence Brewer's meal was the last meal in Texas history. It's strange to think that a man who showed so little humanity in life still managed to change a piece of the system in death, even if it wasn't out of compassion but disgust. That same evening at 6:21 p.m., Lawrence Brewer was strapped to the gurney at the Huntsville unit. He was asked if he had any final words. He said nothing. No apology, no remorse, no explanation. At 6:28 p.m., he was pronounced dead. executed by lethal injection. Outside, a small crowd gathered. Some held signs calling for peace, others for justice. Inside, the tray of untouched food sat as a grim reminder. A feast no one would ever eat, marking the end of a dark tradition. The murder of James Byrd Jr. left deep scars in America's racial history, but it also led to significant change, both socially and legally. In 2009, a new federal law was signed, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, expanding the definition of hate crimes across the United States. And in Texas, Brewer's stunt forced the system to reevaluate even its smallest rituals of mercy. Some argued it was justice. Others said even a condemned man deserves dignity. So what's left of this story today? When people talk about Texas justice, they often remember that last meal, a grotesque gesture that became a symbol of arrogance. But deeper down, there's a lesson. We often think justice is about punishment, an eye for an eye. But when you look closer, the story still raises questions that linger today. What does justice really mean? And where should mercy end? When the crime is this cruel. James Byrd Jr.'s son once said, "You can't fight hate with hate." My father taught us better than that. And maybe that's what makes this story so unforgettable. Because in the end, it's not just about a monster on death row. It's about how one man's cruelty revealed another family's strength. So what do you think? Did Texas make the right decision by ending the last meal tradition? Or should every human, no matter their crime, be given one final moment of choice? Tell me in the comments below if this story made you stop for a moment to think about justice, mercy, or the weight of a single choice. Stay with us. We uncover the stories that history almost forgot, the ones that still echo quietly beneath the headlines. Follow the channel and join me next time for another story that asks the hard questions we often avoid.